My name is Natalie Brooks, and by the time all this happened, I'd spent 12 years in Army logistics. If you've never worked logistics in the military, imagine being responsible for everything people don't think about until it goes wrong. Fuel, trucks, spare parts, medical supplies, transport schedules, maintenance logs, readiness reports, and the endless flow of paperwork that keeps a base running. None of it looks impressive on a poster, but without it, nothing moves. That was my world at Fort Redstone, a place where most people knew me as the one who could fix anything with a phone call, a spreadsheet, or pure stubbornness. What most of them didn't know, at least not yet, was that I grew up with someone who could break things faster than I could fix them. My older sister, Lieutenant Colonel Diane Brooks, had a reputation on base that made junior officers stand a little straighter when she walked by. She had the tone, the posture, the resume, the medals, and a level of confidence that could power a mid-sized city. She also had the advantage of being the daughter our mother bragged about, the one teachers remembered, the one relatives compared me to during awkward holiday dinners. I didn't think much about childhood rivalry when I put on the uniform. I figured the Army would level everything out. It didn't. Diane and I were assigned to the same installation after a personnel reshuffle 2 years earlier. Everyone else thought it was nice that sisters served together. I kept my mouth shut. People assume blood creates teamwork. In our case, it created pressure. She was the commanding officer of the Redstone Logistics Wing, and I was the senior NCO who kept her part of the base from falling apart on a daily basis. If you're imagining a heartfelt sister duo making the mission happen together, stop right there. Diane operated more like I was her personal backstage crew. She made decisions. I prevented those decisions from setting something on fire. It started small. She'd ask me to look over a readiness report she was supposed to finalize. Then she'd ask if I could double-check a maintenance order she didn't have time for. Before long, entire logistics plans were landing on my desk with a sticky note that said, "Need this before 1600. Her signature was on the documents, but the work was mine. Nobody questioned it because the numbers always came out right, the gear always arrived, and operations always ran smoothly. Efficient systems don't raise red flags. When people praised her, she'd say something like, "Well, I do try to set a high standard," as if she'd been the one triple-checking vehicle inspection logs at 9 at night. I didn't complain. I just kept working. I had a son to raise, a career to build, and the kind of personality that defaulted to fixing problems instead of talking about them. The only person who ever noticed how many hours I worked was my 11-year-old Ethan. He'd wait for me to come home, ask about my day, and tell me about school right before falling asleep on the couch. Most nights, I got home so late that I carried him to bed without waking him. I told myself I was doing it for him, that the long hours and missed dinners were an investment in a better future. It sounded reasonable at the time. Things shifted the day our brigade started prepping for hurricane relief deployment. Natural disaster missions move fast. Supplies, equipment, and personnel have to be ready before the storm even hits land. That means the logistics section becomes the heart of the base. Everything depends on accurate data and clean execution. It should have been the moment Diane stepped up, but she seemed more interested in scheduling briefings than actually reading the material she was presenting. Whenever she hit something she didn't recognize, she'd hand it off to me with a tight smile that meant she was expecting magic. That same week, our chain of command announced promotion reviews. I had spent months strengthening my packet. 12 years in the Army, spotless PT tests, excellent evaluations, commendations from 2 bases, and a trail of logistics successes that made other units borrow our templates. My direct peers said I was a lock. Even my battalion commander hinted I should expect good news. I didn't say it out loud, but I genuinely believed it was my year. Then came the board meeting. I walked into the conference room at 0800, uniform pressed, notes ready, face steady. Diane sat across from me, next to Brigade Commander Miller and Deputy Chief Vaughn. For a second, I thought she might actually support me. She'd told me the night before, just be confident. That should have been my clue she was lying. When Miller asked for input, Diane cleared her throat in that deliberate way she did when she wanted attention. "Sir," she said, "Natalie is hard-working, but she's not ready for promotion. She's reliable with paperwork, but leadership requires a different mindset. I've faced mortar fire with less shock. Paperwork." That was how she framed 12 years of keeping this place standing. The room was quiet enough to hear the air conditioner clicking. I didn't look at her. I stared at the table because if I made eye contact, someone would notice the part of my soul trying to walk out the door. Miller asked a few routine questions, thanked me, and dismissed us. Diane didn't say a word as we walked out. She didn't even slow down. As soon as we were 6 steps down the hallway, she said, "I'll need you to finish the supply packet for the storm deployment. I have meetings all day." I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I didn't trust myself to speak. There's a moment in every long, slow disaster where something inside you stops bending. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet snap where the world looks the same but feels different. That was mine. I went back to my office, shut the door, sat down, and looked at the same tasks I'd done for years. Same spreadsheets, same emails, same problems, same person taking credit. Same sister undermining me in front of people who controlled my future. For the first time, the routine didn't numb me. It irritated me. Every line of every checklist felt like proof I'd been carrying more than my share for too long. I opened my job description and read every bullet point. Not once did it say, "Do your sister's work so she can look good in front of leadership." Not once did it say, "Sacrifice your time, your sleep, and your family so she can maintain an image." I closed the file, leaned back, and let the decision settle. It didn't feel dramatic or rebellious. It felt practical, like finally following the rules everyone else pretended to care about. I would do my job, and only my job. No extras, no cover-ups, no late-night fixes that Diane would wave off as routine. If something fell apart, it would fall apart on the person responsible. When 1700 hit, I shut down my computer, grabbed my bag, and walked out of the building. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I went home to Ethan before the sun was down, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about it. My hands were still a little tight from clenching the steering wheel on the drive home when the alarm went off the next morning. I shut it off, sat up, and felt that strange calm again. The kind that shows up right after you finally stop pretending everything is fine. It wasn't confidence. Not yet, but it was the first morning in a long time where I didn't start the day already exhausted. I pulled on my uniform, tied my hair back, and headed onto base with a steady focus that felt almost unfamiliar. When I walked into the logistics building, the hallway chatter died down just slightly, just enough for me to notice people watching me, checking my face, trying to read whether the promotion board had gone well. Word travels fast on a military installation. Nobody said anything out loud, though. People only gossip openly about people they don't respect. When it comes to those who actually do the work, they keep their voices low. I made my way to my office, opened my laptop, and looked at the inbox full of tasks that weren't mine. Supply packet drafts, maintenance updates, procurement questions, a half-finished deployment spreadsheet Diane had pushed onto me with a vague, "Need this cleaned up." Normally I'd lose an hour clearing her mess before breakfast. Today I selected 5 emails in a row and forwarded them to the officers responsible, each message short and by the book. I didn't add explanations. I didn't soften anything. If a lieutenant didn't understand his own section's forms, that was an issue far above my pay grade. Across the hall, the door to Diane's office swung open. She stepped out with a stack of folders, her hair pinned into the neat, unforgiving bun she used as a personality. "Natalie," she said without looking up, "I need the hurricane deployment packet updated by 1300. There were some changes I didn't have time to fix." I stood, walked into the hall, and answered evenly. "That packet belongs to command. If your office approves the plan, you'll want to update it yourself." She blinked. It was the first crack in her expression I'd seen in years. "Excuse me?" "It's outside my assigned responsibilities," I said, keeping my tone level. "I'm following my tasking for the day." Diane stared for a couple seconds, as if waiting for the punchline. When she realized there wasn't one, she pulled her shoulders back and gave me the same look she'd used on me since high school. The one that said she was smarter, older, and destined for bigger things while I was supposed to make myself useful. "You're being dramatic," she said. "This is bigger than you." "It usually is," I said. "But I still have to follow my job description." That wasn't an argument she was used to. Diane excelled at 2 things: commanding people who were intimidated by her, and taking credit for the work of people who weren't. The moment she ran into someone simply refusing to play along, she didn't know where to stand. She spun on her heel and walked away with a stiff stride that said she wasn't done with this conversation, not by a long shot. Inside operations, Lieutenant Harper Wells was already hunched over his monitor, visually overwhelmed by something on the screen. Harper was new sharp enough, but still fresh enough to panic whenever a drop-down menu didn't behave. He glanced at me and then back at his monitor, like he wasn't sure if he should ask for help. Normally, I'd just walk over, fix whatever he'd broken by accident, and teach him the correct sequence of inputs. Instead, I nodded once and sat at my desk. 2 minutes later, he gave in. "Sergeant Brooks, ma'am, do you have a second?" "I can answer anything that falls under my section," I said without turning. "What do you need?" "I'm trying to process the vehicle readiness updates, but something's not matching the maintenance database." "That's maintenance control," I said. "Their office handles those updates." His silence told me everything. Maintenance control never handled anything, unless someone stood behind them and reminded them how. That someone was me. For years. And right now he was realizing he didn't have a cheat code anymore. "I forwarded the issue to them already," I added. "They'll sort it out." He nodded, even though we both knew they probably wouldn't. That wasn't my problem today. By mid-morning, the first real ripples started showing. Someone from transportation stopped by, looking irritated. "Sergeant Brooks, we're missing 3 signatures on the fuel allocation sheet. Did you—" "That's not my section," I said. "You'll need to talk to Lieutenant Stone." "But he never—" "I'm sure he'll figure it out." "Ugh." The man looked confused, then left with the defeated gait of someone who had just discovered there was no adult supervision in the room. I didn't enjoy watching things slip. I'm not the type who likes chaos. But I knew exactly what I was doing. Every gap I stopped filling was a gap Diane had ignored for years, counting on me to patch it over so she could look polished. Working strictly by the book left me with my own legitimate tasks, which I handled quickly. When you're used to doing 20 people's work, doing your own feels like a half-day vacation. I wrapped up a stack of supply requests by lunch, then walked outside to eat at one of the picnic tables near the motor pool. The sun was warm, the air smelled faintly like oil and dust, and for a moment I wondered how long it had been since I'd sat outside during the workday. Halfway through my sandwich, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan's school. "Hi, Miss Brooks," the receptionist said. "Ethan forgot his science project. He says he left it by the dining table." I checked the time. I could drop it off and be back without bending any rules. For once, my schedule wasn't held hostage by someone else's poor planning. I told her I'd bring it. Ethan's face lit up when he saw me walk into the office holding his project. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprised like I'd walked in wearing a superhero cape. "I had time," I said. "Thought I'd bring this before the glue gives up on life." He grinned. "Thanks, you're the best." The compliment hit in a place I hadn't paid attention to in a long time. I drove back to base with the quiet realization that if work had consumed any more of my time, I might have forgotten how good it felt to just show up for my kid. When I got back to the building, a small crowd had formed near the operations desk. People stood around with the shared frustration of a system failing in slow motion. Harper looked like he'd aged 10 years since I last saw him. "Ma'am," he said, "we've got conflicting supply levels, missing transport times, and maintenance won't answer their phone." I kept my face neutral. "Have you notified your chain of command?" "Yes, ma'am, but they said Diane already approved the initial plan." If he expected me to magically fix it, he didn't say it out loud. The whole room was bracing under the weight of issues I'd normally clear in a morning. Watching it pile up felt like watching a pot boil over in a kitchen where no one remembered where the towels were kept. A few desks away, Diane stormed out of her office. "What is going on with today's readiness updates?" she demanded, waving a stack of papers like an officer who thought shaking them hard enough might make numbers behave. "They haven't been reconciled across sections yet, ma'am," Harper said. Her eyes snapped to me. "And why not?" "Because that's a cross-department task, and the responsible departments haven't submitted their parts." Diane didn't know what to do with that answer. She'd spent so many years operating with invisible support that she had no idea how to function without it. Her jaw tightened, and she walked away without a word, closing her office door a little too loudly. The rest of the afternoon moved like a clock missing half its gears. Tasks jammed together, sections tripped over one another, and every small oversight stacked into something larger. It wasn't a meltdown yet, but the cracks were widening, and even the officers too arrogant to notice problems were starting to sense something shifting. By 1700, I shut my computer, stood, and walked out again. Not hurried, not proud, just steady. The air outside was cooler than earlier, the sky dimming over the motor pool as engines rumbled in the distance. I headed to the parking lot with the same calm I'd started the day with. The kind that felt less like rebellion and more like returning something I never should have given away in the first place. The next morning came with that same steady feeling, the one that made everything look sharper and quieter at the same time. I walked into the building just as the overnight duty crew was clocking out, and even they looked unusually alert. A couple of them glanced at me the way people do when they can't decide whether you're the source of a problem or the only person who can fix it. Either way, nobody stopped me, which was already an improvement over the usual string of "Sergeant Brooks, quick question" attacks I used to get before I even reached my office. I sat down, turned on my monitor, and found the inbox stacked with carryover issues, half-finished forms, supply discrepancies, missing sign-offs, all things I normally would have cleared before they became anyone else's problem. I read each one, matched it to the correct department, and forwarded it with one-line instructions. No commentary, no hints, no back-channel shortcuts. The Army loves to preach, follow the chain of command. So I figured it was time to let everyone experience what that actually looks like when no one is secretly correcting their mistakes. Around 0900, I heard Diane's voice echo down the hall. Even from a distance, she had that clipped, irritated tone she used when things weren't aligning with the picture she wanted to present. Her boots hit the floor with the rhythm of someone marching toward a problem she intended to blame on someone else. A second later, she appeared in my doorway with a folder in hand. "Natalie," she said, not bothering with hello. "This packet is still incomplete. The deployment checklist isn't updated, and the med equipment list is all over the place." I looked up from my screen. "That's because the updates haven't been submitted yet. You always have this done by now." "I'm not responsible for their sections," I said simply. "Once those officers finish their parts, I can handle mine." "Nye." Diane's eyes narrowed. "You know exactly why they're behind. That's between them and their chain of command," I said. "Not me." She stared at me long enough that the silence felt like a physical object between us. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "I've just stopped making it easier than it should be." For a second, her face shifted, not anger, not confusion, but something that looked like realization, or maybe frustration that she couldn't pull rank over basic job descriptions. She set the folder down harder than necessary and walked away so abruptly that her hair bun wobbled. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Harper Wells peeked into my office with the cautious expression of someone approaching a wild animal he hoped was in a friendly mood. "Ma'am, quick question," he said, holding his tablet like a shield. "We've got 3 different numbers for the pallet count going into the hurricane shipment. I'm trying to figure out which one's correct." "That's inventory control," I said, not taking my eyes off my monitor. "Yes, ma'am, but their numbers don't match transportation's, and transportation says maintenance didn't update the load sheet, and maintenance says procurement." "Then you'll need to tell them to reconcile it," I said. "He didn't move." "Oh. Okay. Now." Normally, this would have been the part where I stood up, showed him how to trace the issue through the system, and fix the discrepancy in 5 minutes. But stepping in would have put me right back where I started, carrying the workload of an entire wing while everyone else operated with the confidence of people who thought documentation updated itself. Harper walked off wearing an expression that made it clear he'd just realized how much work competent people save him daily. By midday, I heard raised voices coming from the operations center. When I stepped inside, 2 staff sergeants from transportation were arguing over scheduling errors. A maintenance specialist was swearing at his computer like profanity was going to fix his data entry. Several junior officers were flipping through binders, as if the answer might magically appear between pages they'd never read before. The whole situation reminded me of a group project where the only responsible kid finally refuses to do all the work. Everyone else sits there stunned, realizing how much they relied on someone they barely acknowledged. And right in the middle of the chaos stood Diane. She was holding a clipboard, shoulders tight, jaw set, scanning the room like she was considering replacing everyone with cardboard cutouts. "Why are there still gaps in this readiness data?" she snapped. One of the sergeants didn't answer, which only made her angrier. "Someone explain to me why this isn't done." "It's because the sections haven't synced their reports yet," Harper said, voice small but honest. "And why didn't Sergeant Brooks fix them?" Diane asked, pointing at me like I was the designated scapegoat, and she was just waiting to pin the tail on the donkey. I stepped forward. "Because it's not my job to fix them. Now." Diane's eyes darted to me like she'd been waiting for that answer. "So you're refusing a direct request from your commanding officer?" "I'm following my assigned responsibilities," I said, "just like everyone else." A few heads turned sharply at that officers and enlisted alike. Not because I'd said anything wrong, but because they recognized the sentence for what it was, a line being drawn. Diane opened her mouth to fire back, but before she could speak, Her radio buzzed. She answered, listened, and her face changed. "We have a problem," she said, then left without explaining. Within 15 minutes, the rumor made its way around the building. One of the outbound transport convoys had stalled because fuel allocation didn't match protocol standards. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was the kind of mistake that shouldn't have happened at all, not at a logistics hub like ours. As I walked back to my desk, I couldn't help noticing something interesting. The people who used to shove tasks onto me were suddenly trying to figure out their own sections. Some were confused, some were frustrated, but all of them were finally doing the jobs they were paid for. Later in the afternoon, I grabbed a coffee from the break room and sat outside for a moment. A couple of soldiers walked past, one muttering about missing signatures on equipment checks, the other complaining that nobody knew who was responsible for cross-verifying transport schedules. It was almost surreal hearing problems voiced out loud that I'd been silently fixing for years. When I went back inside, Diane was waiting near my office. She didn't have the confident commander posture this time. She looked like someone who'd spent the day plugging leaks with her bare hands. "Natalie," she said, using a tone that tried to sound casual and failed, "we need to talk." I placed my coffee down and met her eyes. "About what?" "You know this situation is temporary," she said. "Everyone's just overwhelmed because of the hurricane mission." "They're overwhelmed because nobody reads the documentation," I said. "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Her expression tightened. She was used to controlling a narrative, not wrestling with reality. "You think you're making a point," she said slowly, "but you're not helping anyone." "I'm helping by doing my job," I said. "Everyone else should try it." For a moment, I thought she might snap. Instead, she took a step back and straightened her uniform, a small reset for her composure. "The brigade will want answers if this keeps up," she warned, but her voice lacked its usual force. "Then they should look at the people in charge," I said. She didn't respond. She just walked away, this time without the usual sharpness in her stride. I finished the day without picking up anyone else's workload, without staying late, and without undoing the mistakes simmering across the wing. When 1700 arrived, I logged off, grabbed my stuff, and left the building. The hallway noise had thinned, the indoor lights reflecting off the polished floors as I walked through, and the only thing that felt unusual was how normal the exit felt. Walking into the building the next day felt like stepping into a room where someone had left the oven door open. Not dangerous, but definitely too warm for comfort. People weren't panicking, but they were moving faster, talking lower, checking paperwork twice instead of pretending they understood it the first time. The atmosphere had shifted from routine to reactive, and anyone paying attention could tell the system was straining. I headed straight to my desk and opened the readiness dashboard. It looked like someone had spilled alphabet soup on a spreadsheet. Numbers that never changed were suddenly fluctuating, categories weren't matching, and two separate sections had uploaded files with the wrong date formats. I sipped my coffee and watched the slow motion unraveling like a weather report predicting a storm everyone insisted wasn't coming. Across the room, Lieutenant Harper Wells was flipping through binders with the desperate energy of someone searching for a parachute on a plane he hadn't realized was midair. He spotted me and hurried over. "Ma'am, inventory control says they submitted their numbers, but transportation says they didn't, and maintenance says they can't update anything until procurement finishes a form they don't actually have." "That sounds like a chain of command problem," I said. "Yes, ma'am, but nobody knows whose chain of command it is," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Then they should figure it out," I said. "It's part of their job." He didn't argue. He just walked off with the resigned look of someone realizing adulthood was less glamorous than advertised. I pulled up my own tasks for the day and started completing what I was actually responsible for. It took 20 minutes. My workload had been short for days now, but each morning it still surprised me. Spending a decade cleaning up everyone's mistakes had distorted my sense of what normal work looked like. Now, watching the base try to function without its unofficial safety net was like watching a group of people try to assemble a bookshelf without the instructions, the screws, or any spatial reasoning. By mid-morning, a staff sergeant from transportation approached me with a clipboard. "Sergeant Brooks, we're missing vehicle inspection confirmations for 8 trucks. Did you send them over?" "I don't run inspections," I said. "That's maintenance. Maintenance says they didn't get the request." That would explain the missing confirmations. He stared at the paper, then back at me, like hoping I might suddenly take pity and solve the issue out of muscle memory. When I didn't, he nodded, muttered, "All right," and walked off without his usual swagger. All day long, people were discovering the painful truth that logistics is a tedious machine. Once you stop oiling even one gear, the whole thing whines. Around noon, the first real warning sign hit. A junior specialist rushed into the operations center to tell Diane that a pallet count didn't match the transport manifest. It was a small discrepancy, 4 pallets missing from a stack of over 100, but small discrepancies in a hurricane mission were like hairline cracks in a dam. If you ignored them, everything above them came crashing down. I watched from my desk as the specialist explained. Diane folded her arms tighter with every word, as if pressure alone could hold the situation together. "Check the digital logs," she ordered. "We did, ma'am. They don't match." "Then check the physical logs." "They don't match either." Diane tapped the clipboard with her pen. "Why didn't Sergeant Brooks catch this?" "Because I'm not the human duct tape you've built your career on," I thought. Out loud I said, "Because pallet counts are supply chain's responsibility. My section doesn't handle physical tallies." The specialist nodded quickly, as if confirming I wasn't secretly holding out on them. Diane's frustration was almost visible in the air, like static. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She wasn't used to a world where I didn't automatically step in to save her. The absence of my support was a bigger shock than the logistics failures happening around her. I left the operations center to grab lunch and passed a group of soldiers arguing behind the motor pool. They were trying to determine why 3 cargo trucks had ended up listed under 2 separate schedules. One insisted the maintenance test wasn't logged. Another swore procurement changed a part number without telling anyone. A third said the issue was Diane's fault, which earned him a sharp elbow from his buddy, who clearly didn't want to be caught trash-talking a lieutenant colonel. Everywhere I walked, I heard versions of the same conversations, confused, annoyed, disorganized. It felt strange to witness a system become honest for the first time. Logistics failures don't appear out of nowhere. They appear when the person keeping everything together stops plugging the holes. When I got back inside, I found an email from the Brigade Operations Office requesting updated readiness numbers by 1600. The deadline was standard. The irony was not. Normally, Diane would have handed me the entire project with a sticky note and an unreasonable timeline. This time, she hadn't said anything, probably because she knew asking would only highlight how unprepared she was. I took my time entering the data from my section. Everything I submitted was accurate, clean, and within regulations. What happened to everyone else's numbers wasn't my business. When I finished, I stepped out to refill my water bottle and saw Harper pacing by the printer like the machine was counting down to his execution. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Not exactly," he said. "Brigade wants updated movement orders, but transportation hasn't synced their updates, and procurement is saying they didn't get the supply codes, and maintenance is 2 days behind on inspections, and so they'll need to coordinate," I said. He ran a hand through his hair. "It's just, this never happened before." I didn't say the obvious. It never happened before because I used to fix everything before it reached his desk. Instead, I told him, better they learn now than during a deployment. He nodded slowly, like the idea was unpleasant but logical. Late in the afternoon, the second warning sign hit. Procurement flagged a major conflict in the medical equipment list. Half of the items Diane approved were missing serial numbers, and a quarter weren't even in stock. She'd been signing off on forms she didn't read, trusting I would catch the errors at the last minute. This time, I didn't. From across the room, I watched Diane run her hand over her forehead, the first sign she was starting to understand how deep the cracks ran. She started barking orders about resubmitting lists, contacting suppliers, cross-checking databases, but she wasn't giving direct instructions. She was firing blind. A commanding officer who didn't know the system couldn't guide anyone through the chaos. She called my name from halfway across the room. "Natalie, I need you to..." I kept my voice calm. If it's outside my section, it needs to go through the departments responsible. For a moment, she didn't react. Then she turned away sharply, like acknowledging my answer might cause her uniform to wrinkle. The rest of the day played out like a slow-motion collision. Readiness numbers drifted further apart. Tracking sheets contradicted themselves. Junior officers circled problems without understanding them. And Diane, for once, couldn't hide behind authority. By the time 1700 arrived, the entire operations center looked like a group of people trying to solve a puzzle that had too many missing pieces. I shut down my computer again, grabbed my bag, and walked out with the same steady pace as the day before. Behind me, voices rose and fell, printers jammed, phones rang unanswered, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise, the truth was starting to become impossible to ignore. Stepping through the gate the next morning, I could already feel the shift in tempo across the base. Soldiers were moving with that urgent but controlled energy that only shows up when something big and time-sensitive gets dropped on everyone at once. A hurricane alert had escalated overnight, and FEMA requested military support from multiple installations, including ours. That meant airlift schedules, supply chains, vehicle deployments, medical shipments, and fuel logistics were about to become the center of the universe for the next 48 hours. Inside the logistics building, the tone was different, loud, frantic, and jagged. People were talking over each other. Printers were spitting out non-stop pages. Phones were ringing without anyone answering them. A specialist rushed past me holding 2 clipboards and a half-eaten granola bar like he'd forgotten he was still chewing it. Another was trying to fix a jammed copier with the desperation of someone trying to defuse a bomb by poking it repeatedly. Hurricane missions never go smoothly, even in well-oiled units. And our unit wasn't exactly well-oiled anymore. It was more like a machine that had been working because one person kept hitting it with a wrench just right, and that person had recently decided she was done being the wrench. I walked toward my office, passing Harper, who looked like he hadn't blinked since sunrise. "Sergeant Brooks," he said. "We need updated equipment loadouts for the first transport wave." "That's logistics movement," I said. "They said they need maintenance clearance." "Then maintenance needs to clear it." 1. He nodded with the resigned acceptance of a man hearing his own sentence read back to him. By the time I reached my desk, 2 emails marked urgent were already waiting. One from procurement about missing inventory codes, another from transport demanding clarification on pallet categories. Both were issues I'd normally solve in under 10 minutes. But today, they went straight back to the departments responsible, polite, and by the book. Across the center, Diane was in her office, sleeves rolled up, her desk buried under folders she had no idea how to sort. She was on the phone with someone from Brigade, and from the way she was gripping her pen, I guessed the call wasn't going well. I heard words like delay, discrepancy, and why wasn't this caught yesterday, followed by her usual tactic of blaming the storm of paperwork, as if paperwork produced itself. An hour later, the first major red flag hit. A transport convoy scheduled to move fuel to the airfield was stalled because the allocation sheet didn't match the approved numbers. The system flagged it automatically. Under normal circumstances, I'd reconcile it, notify the fuel point, update the log, and clear the route. This time, no one knew who should fix it. Transportation assumed maintenance. Maintenance assumed procurement. Procurement assumed Diane. Diane assumed me. When she found me entering data at my desk, she marched over like a thundercloud with rank. "Natalie, the convoy's delayed. We need the allocation fixed immediately." "Then transportation needs to correct their sheet," I said, not looking up. Her voice sharpened. "This is an emergency. I'm giving you a direct instruction." "No, you're not," I said. "You're asking me to fix something outside my section. If you want someone to handle it, it needs to be the department responsible." "No." For the first time, she didn't snap back. She looked at me the way someone looks at a locked door they expected to open with one push. The hurricane relief operation wasn't something she could fake her way through too many moving parts, too much accountability, too many eyes. The pressure kept building. A medical shipment meant for the first outbound aircraft was flagged for incomplete forms. The airfield called, demanding updates. Procurement said they'd never received the equipment request. The hospital team insisted they'd submitted it. Someone was clearly lying. And that person wasn't me. Every 30 minutes, someone arrived at my desk with a problem that wasn't mine to fix. And every 30 minutes, my answer remained the same. "That belongs to X department." You could tell who had been skating by for years. They were the ones sweating through their uniforms. By early afternoon, the building felt like it was vibrating. You could see small mistakes morphing into bigger ones. Supply numbers weren't aligning. Movement orders conflicted with fuel timelines. Maintenance logs had entire sections left blank. A junior officer accidentally uploaded an outdated readiness sheet to brigade headquarters, making it look like half our equipment was overdue for inspection. Meanwhile, the storm on the East Coast was accelerating. The window for deploying the first wave of support was shrinking by the hour, and the base needed everything perfectly aligned to meet that timeline. Then came the crash moment. A captain from the airfield sprinted into the logistics center like someone had lit his boots on fire. "Who authorized this manifest?" he shouted, holding up a clipboard like it was evidence in a court trial. Diane stepped out of her office. "What's the issue?" The medical pallet lists don't match the cargo load. The codes are wrong, the weight is off, and 3 items aren't logged at all. We can't load the aircraft until this is fixed. Now, everyone in the room froze. Not dramatically, just that stillness people feel before something inevitable and unpleasant. The captain turned to Diane. Your wing approved this. Who checked it? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. My team is still reconciling data, she said stiffly. He stared at her. Ma'am, we launch in 90 minutes. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for answers she didn't have. Where's the corrected list? She asked. The captain didn't blink. There is no corrected list. A slow realization crept across her face, a kind of dawning horror she hadn't expected to feel. She looked straight at me, not because she thought I could fix it, but because deep down, she knew I normally would have fixed it already. She didn't say the words, but everything about her expression said, please. I met her gaze calmly. Medical equipment isn't my section. For a moment, no one else breathed. The captain muttered something under his breath about incompetence and stormed out to try salvaging what he could. Diane stood there, frozen, caught between her rank and her helplessness. Officers around her pretended to keep working, but everyone saw it. The implosion of a commander who'd spent years relying on invisible labor. And she knew it too. That's when the brigade's emergency notification came in. A high-level briefing had been called to address logistical inconsistencies threatening mission readiness. People stopped moving. Phones fell silent. Printers paused mid-page like even the machines sensed the tension. A specialist read the message again, then whispered, Brigade wants the entire logistics command team in the war room. Diane's face went pale. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Her career was finally colliding with the truth she'd been avoiding, and the impact was going to be loud. Walking toward the war room felt strangely calm, like the part of a storm where the wind stops just long enough for everyone to realize the roof wasn't built as well as they thought. Soldiers moved aside as Diane and I passed, but nobody saluted with their usual crispness. People weren't sure whether they were watching a leadership crisis or the opening scene of someone's career obituary. Inside the room, the atmosphere tightened immediately. Brigade Commander Miller stood at the front with a binder tucked under his arm, his face set in the expression he wore when he wanted answers, and expected none of them to be pleasant. Deputy Chief Vaughn was next to him, flipping through a stack of printed screenshots from system logs. 2 officers from the Inspector General's team sat at the table, and their presence alone meant the situation was officially bad. IG doesn't show up unless someone's about to be audited, corrected, or yelled at in a way that ends careers. Diane stepped toward the table, shoulders squared, chin up trying to project control, but her jaw gave her away. I took a seat at the far end. Nobody offered small talk. Nobody asked how our morning was. Nobody even breathed too loudly. The whole room felt like it had been shrink-wrapped in tension. Commander Miller started without preamble. We've identified multiple inconsistencies in the hurricane deployment cycle. Transport manifests, medical load lists, maintenance inspections, and supply inventories all have mismatched or incomplete data. These issues are delaying airlift readiness. He wasn't yelling, which was worse. A calm officer is an officer who has already decided someone is responsible. He looked straight at Diane. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, these documents have your approval signatures. Walk us through how this happened. Diane cleared her throat, which on a normal day meant she was gearing up to sound authoritative. Today it sounded like someone buying time. Sir, we've been working through high-volume updates due to the storm. Several sections are behind on submissions, and the data pipelines haven't fully synced. Vaughn raised an eyebrow. Data pipelines don't sync themselves, ma'am. Who's responsible for reconciling them? Diane hesitated. It wasn't long, maybe half a second, but long enough for everyone to notice. My team is managing reconciliation, she said. Who specifically? Miller asked. Her eyes flicked toward me, fast but unmistakable. Vaughn caught it instantly. Are you saying Sergeant Brooks is responsible for your reconciliation duties? She stiffened. Sergeant Brooks usually assists with... Not the question, ma'am, Vaughn said. Is it her responsibility or yours? The room held its breath. Finally, she said, It's my responsibility. She didn't want to say it, but she couldn't lie with IG sitting right there. Vaughn nodded slowly, like he was checking boxes on a mental list of potential disasters. One of the IG officers leaned forward. Ma'am, we reviewed your approval history. Your signature appears on all deployment documents for the last 2 years. Can you explain the discrepancies between your approvals and your familiarity with the underlying procedures? It was a polite way of asking, how did you sign things you didn't understand? Diane opened her binder, looked down, flipped a page, closed it again, none of which provided any answers. I rely on my team to ensure technical accuracy, she said. Which team? The IG officer asked. A tightening flickered in Diane's jaw again. My operations team. No. Does that include Sergeant Brooks? Another quiet moment passed, the kind that reveals more than anything said out loud. Yes, she said. And what exactly do you rely on her for? The IG officer asked, voice calm but sharp. The room leaned in a fraction. Even the air conditioner sounded quieter. Before Diane could craft an answer, Harper unexpectedly spoke from the corner. Sergeant Brooks handles most of the technical reconciliation, sir. A wave of surprise moved across the table, not from the message itself, but because someone had finally said it out loud. Commander Miller shifted his attention to me. Sergeant Brooks, is that accurate? I sat up straight. Sir, I've contributed technical support to multiple sections over the years. Define multiple, he said. All of them, sir, I said plainly. You could hear a pin drop, roll across the table, and bounce twice. Vaughn blinked. All of them? As in, the entire logistics wing? Yes, sir. The IG officer tapped a pen against his notepad. Is that documented anywhere? No, sir. Vaughn leaned forward. Why not? Because it was never officially assigned to me, I said. I stepped in when things broke. Did you do this at your own discretion? He asked. I nodded. Yes, sir. Did anyone instruct you to? He asked. I glanced at Diane. She looked away. No, sir, I said. Commander Miller ran a hand across his chin. So you've been covering responsibilities outside your job description for years? Yes, sir. And what changed this week? I started following my actual job description, I said. Miller wasn't emotional, but his eyebrows rose just enough to make every officer in the room exhale slowly. Vaughn looked at Diane. Ma'am, did you delegate your responsibilities to Sergeant Brooks? No, she said quickly, but you allowed her to perform them, he said. I didn't expect her to stop, she said before thinking. The words slipped out. They weren't strategic, professional, or filtered. They were honest, and honesty hit like an artillery shell. You could see the realization spread across her face a second too late. The IG officer scribbled something on his notepad. Miller sat back, expression unreadable. So the functioning of your wing depended on the voluntary, undocumented work of someone outside the chain of command. Diane didn't answer. She knew better than to try. Harper shifted nervously. The captain from the airfield, who had joined during the conversation, crossed his arms like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Someone near the projector coughed into their sleeve just to break the silence. Then Miller asked the question that finally cut through everything. Sergeant Brooks, can you resolve the discrepancies delaying the hurricane deployment? I looked at the stack of documents on the table, the mismatched codes, the broken workflows, the incomplete forms, the data inconsistencies. It wasn't an impossible mess, just a time-consuming one. I can correct my section and guide the responsible departments through theirs, I said. But it requires their participation. Vaughn nodded slowly. Fair. Now. Miller looked between Diane and me, then back to the documents. We need this mission operational. Lives depend on it. Diane straightened like she finally found stability in something she could understand. Sir, if you give me time, I can. He raised a hand to stop her. Lieutenant Colonel, I've seen enough. The wing needs expertise right now, not overconfidence. Her face faltered. Vaughn then turned to me. Sergeant Brooks, we're tasking you to coordinate the immediate reconciliation effort across sections. Full cooperation from all departments is mandatory. You'll report progress directly to brigade. There was no applause, no dramatic pause. Just the kind of directive that changes everything without raising its voice. I nodded. Yes, sir. Diane's expression didn't change much, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was processing. And the moment she understood what she had just lost or what she was about to lose hadn't arrived yet. Miller closed the binder. All right, let's get this mission back on track. People stood, chairs scraping across the floor. Officers hurried out to their departments. Papers were gathered, radios clicked on, and the controlled chaos of fixing a failing system began. But even as the room emptied, the unspoken truth hung in the air. The hurricane wasn't the only thing exposing weaknesses. The wing had been running on borrowed effort for years, and everyone had finally seen who it belonged to. Stepping out of the war room, I felt the shift immediately. Not in the dramatic Hollywood sense, no gasps, no slow-motion turns, no dramatic music swelling in the background. It was quieter than that. People who normally ignored me when Diane was around suddenly made eye contact. A few nodded, others stepped out of the way faster than usual. Respect in the army doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives with silence and space. I headed straight to the operations center. The place looked like a tornado had hit a printer farm. Papers covered desks. Screens blinked with error messages. Phones rang. Nobody answered quickly enough. The hurricane mission had shoved everyone past their comfort zone, and now they were learning what their actual responsibilities looked like when someone stopped performing logistical miracles for them behind the scenes. Diane walked in a moment later. She wasn't speaking, but her posture said plenty. It was the stance of an officer who'd been told something she didn't want to hear but couldn't challenge without risking insubordination. Her shoulders were squared too tightly. Her jaw was working overtime. Her eyes were scanning for someone to blame. She saw me and tried to reclaim the authority she felt slipping. "Natalie," she said sharply, "I want you to follow up with transportation. They're still behind on the movement order reconciliations." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't change my tone. I didn't match her tension. I simply stated the truth. That's their job, not mine. Her lips parted slightly, like she'd been preparing a different script. "We need this fixed now." "And they need to fix it," I said. "I can guide them, but I'm not doing it for them." She took a step forward, lowering her voice even though the entire room was listening. "This isn't the time to be stubborn." "I'm not being stubborn," I said, still calm. "I'm following my responsibilities." She opened her mouth but didn't speak. It hung there for half a second, then a full second. Her authority depended heavily on me, quietly filling in every gap. The moment I stopped, the structure she'd leaned on became a stage prop wobbling in the wind. Before she could regroup, Lieutenant Harper hurried over with a tablet in hand. He stopped between us like he'd stumbled into a family argument he wanted no part of. "Ma'am," he said to Diane, "Brigade wants updated transport times on the first convoy." "Then get them," Diane snapped. Harper swallowed. "We can't. Transport updated half their numbers but didn't sync them with maintenance. And maintenance says they're waiting for procurement. And procurement says..." "Stop," she said, rubbing her forehead. "Just stop." Harper looked like he wanted to evaporate. I took the tablet from him, glanced at it, and handed it back. "You'll need to go directly to each department. They have the missing pieces." He nodded reluctantly, turning away with the defeated steps of a man walking into a group project he didn't sign up for. Diane watched all of it with a tightening expression. She wasn't angry about the delays. She was angry that the delays revealed how much she didn't know. When everything ran smoothly, she looked competent. When things fell apart, people saw the truth. A captain from supply hurried in next, face flushed. "We've got issues with the equipment distribution list. The weights don't match the manifests." "Then fix it," Diane said, waving a stressed hand. "We tried," he replied, "but the categories weren't updated, so the system kicked everything back." "Nut." Diane's frustration was boiling. "Why do these problems keep coming up today?" He hesitated, then said in a low voice, "Because Sergeant Brooks isn't fixing them anymore." The room stilled. Diane's eyes snapped to him. "That's not her job," she said. The captain blinked. "Exactly, ma'am." That was the first time I saw Diane's confidence actually falter. She'd built her whole leadership style on a foundation she pretended she created. Now that the person who actually built it was letting her stand on her own, the cracks were showing everywhere. A radio crackled. Someone shouted from across the room that the medical equipment list still hadn't been approved. Another person yelled about missing pallets. Someone else couldn't locate the alternate route plan for the convoy. It wasn't chaos. It was accountability landing like a sledgehammer. Diane finally said, "Natalie, enough. I'm ordering you to help with this reconciliation now." I looked directly at her. "I can help with my section. That's all. You've worked these systems longer than anyone," she said. "That's why the department needs to learn them," I said. "I won't keep enabling shortcuts." Her frustration snapped. "This is not the time to teach lessons." "It's not a lesson," I said. "It's reality." That's when Commander Miller walked into the operations center. He didn't slam the door or shout. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to freeze every moving part in the room. The colonels and captains who normally tried to look busy suddenly inspected their paperwork with religious intensity. He walked straight to Diane. "Lieutenant Colonel Brooks," he said, crisp but controlled. "I need a status update." Diane stood straighter. "Sir, we're working through a few remaining discrepancies." "No," he said, cutting her off, "you're not." Her confidence shrank by an inch. "The IG team briefed me," he continued. "Your wing has been operating without proper internal controls for years. And now a real mission has exposed it." Her throat tightened. "Sir, with all respect," he turned to me. "Sergeant Brooks, are you coordinating the reconciliation as instructed?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Departments have begun correcting their sections." "No. And how long before we get accurate readiness?" "If all sections cooperate," I said, "we can stabilize the critical components in time for the deployment cycle." He nodded. "Good." Diane looked away, as if trying to hide the shade of red creeping across her neck. The room had shifted. People weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at me not with pity, not with surprise, but with something closer to trust. Miller addressed the room. "From this moment forward, reconcile your own sections. If you have questions, Sergeant Brooks will verify procedures, but nobody funnels work to her. Understood?" A chorus of, "Yes, sir," filled the air. Diane didn't respond right away. Miller turned to her last, waiting. She forced out a stiff, hollow, "Yes, sir." "Good," he said, "get it done." He left without ceremony, and the operations center returned to motion with a different kind of energy, focused, tense, but clearer. As people moved around me, asking technical questions about their own responsibilities, I noticed Diane standing near her office doorway. She wasn't talking. She wasn't barking orders. She was watching. Not with authority, just awareness. For the first time in her career, she wasn't the gravitational center of the workspace. She had become a person in the room instead of the person running it. And she knew exactly what that meant. Stepping deeper into the operations center, I could feel the tension trying to settle into something manageable as people scrambled to fix their own sections. It wasn't smooth or efficient, but at least they were finally doing the work they'd been avoiding for years. A captain from procurement was hunched over his laptop typing like he owed the keyboard money. A specialist from maintenance was flipping through a checklist with the expression of someone who'd only just realized adults don't magically appear to solve problems. Even Harper had stopped pacing and started directing his team with something close to real confidence. I sat at my desk, opened the system dashboard, and began verifying submissions. Not fixing them, just verifying them. The difference was everything. For the first time in a long while, people were following the chain of command like it wasn't a suggestion. Diane stepped out of her office again, but this time she wasn't marching or barking or pretending she wasn't rattled. She walked slower, scanning the room as if she barely recognized the place. She wasn't looking for me. She was looking for the version of her command that she'd grown comfortable with. The version where she gave orders without being questioned, where work magically completed itself behind her signature, where nobody ever paused long enough to wonder who kept the unit afloat. It wasn't there anymore. She stopped behind my chair. "Natalie," she said, her voice lower than usual, "how far behind are we?" "Depends on the section," I said, not turning around. "Transportation's close. Maintenance needs more time. Procurement is still reconciling supply codes." "Nye." I expected pushback, frustration, maybe an order. Instead, she said quietly, "What do they need to get it done?" It wasn't an admission of failure, but it was the closest thing to humility I'd heard from her in years. "They need to do their jobs," I said, "and they're learning. That's enough for now." She didn't move for several seconds. Then she walked away without saying anything else. It wasn't victory, it wasn't surrender. It was something stranger, a commander who'd finally realized the ground under her feet wasn't solid. Around midday, the first wave of corrected documents started flowing in. Slowly at first, then faster. People worked with a kind of desperate clarity, not because they feared punishment, but because they finally saw how fragile the system had become. It was like opening a toolbox and realizing half the tools were plastic. The shock makes you take responsibility whether you want to or not. One specialist brought me a stack of updated forms with both hands, like he was handing off medical records for a heart transplant. "Ma'am, can you check if these are right?" I skimmed them. "They're correct." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since breakfast. "Thank God." He walked off straighter than he arrived. Next came the fuel allocation numbers, then the pallet confirmations, then the maintenance logs. All submitted by their actual owners, not quietly dumped on my desk with the expectation that I'd clean the mess before anyone noticed it existed. While this was happening, Diane tried to involve herself in each group, but every time she approached, the officers redirected her. Not disrespectfully, but firmly. "Ma'am, Sergeant Brooks already verified the procedure. Ma'am, we're following the correct routing now. Ma'am, we've got it under control." Loth. Those words had probably never been spoken in her vicinity before, certainly not in that tone. The room wasn't defying her, it was functioning without depending on her, and she didn't know how to react to that. She eventually retreated to her office, not slamming the door, not shouting, just leaving. I didn't chase after her. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel vindictive. What I felt was familiar, the same heaviness I experienced every time Jake asked why I kept missing his school events. The same weight I felt when I realized I'd built a life where my worth depended entirely on being irreplaceable at work. This time, the consequences weren't mine to carry. The afternoon pushed forward with rapid updates. Captain Alden from Supply approached me again. "We're ready to sync with maintenance if you want to oversee." "I'll verify," I said, "but you lead." He nodded and turned to direct his team. It wasn't perfect. They stumbled, questioned themselves, double-checked things they should have known years ago, but they were doing it. Through it all, Diane remained in her office with the door open just enough that she could watch the room. Maybe she thought observing would help her understand why everything felt different. Or maybe she was trying to figure out who she was when she wasn't leaning on me. The real test came near 1500, when transportation updated the last of the movement requests and pinged me for verification. I reviewed each line. Every truck was accounted for, every weight class logged correctly, every fuel code aligned with the mission's needs. It wasn't flawless, but it was functional. I sent the approval back and stood up to walk to the ops center board. "Movement orders are green," I said. The room collectively exhaled relief mixed with disbelief. That's when Commander Miller walked back in. He scanned the screens, the people, the stacks of updated paperwork. His expression softened, but not in a sentimental way, more in the way someone looks at a structure and finally sees it holding weight the way it was supposed to. "Status?" he asked. "Operational," I answered. "We're ready for the first wave." He nodded. "Good work." His gaze shifted to the teams behind me, and then finally to Diane. She stood just outside her office, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, trying to look composed. The problem was, everyone in the room already knew the truth. Composure without competence isn't leadership. He stepped toward her. "Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, your team has stabilized the mission, but Brigade will still conduct a full review of your command processes." She nodded stiffly. "Understood, sir." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. When he left, the room remained busy, but the energy had changed again. People weren't frantic, they were focused, engaged, present. Everyone was doing their part, and for the first time in years, the work didn't feel like it was being carried by one person. I returned to my desk to upload the final documents. Diane approached again, slower this time, almost hesitant. She stopped next to me, hands still behind her back. "Thank you," she said quietly. Not emotional, not dramatic, not apologetic, just a simple truth she'd been avoiding for most of her career. "You're welcome," I said. I didn't add anything else, neither did she. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. I wasn't offering it. The mission was moving, the structure was standing, and the truth had settled into the room like dust finally landing on a shelf. Outside, the sky was shifting toward evening, the sun hitting the fence line just right. Inside, the operations center kept humming. Nobody noticed I'd finished my work early. Nobody asked me to save them. Nobody dropped anything on my desk. Not because they didn't need help, because they finally realized the system wasn't supposed to work that way. The next morning came with an unusual kind of quiet, the kind that settles in after a long night of people finally doing their jobs instead of hoping someone else would. When I walked into the logistics building, the shift was obvious. Screens were active. Officers were actually reading their own reports. Specialists weren't wandering around asking where forms went. For once, the place looked like an operations center instead of a complaint department. I set my coffee down and opened the readiness dashboard. Everything was holding steady. The hurricane mission's first wave had launched successfully, and the second wave was preparing for rollout. It was the kind of progress that usually happened because I stayed at my desk until midnight, except this time it was happening because everyone in the building had been forced to wake up to reality. I could feel eyes on me, but not in the way I used to. It wasn't people watching me to figure out what I was doing so they could copy it. It was people watching with something closer to respect. Gratitude, even. Diane came in a few minutes later. She wasn't making noise or commanding attention. She walked to her office without saying anything. Her uniform was crisp as always, but there was a weight in her shoulders that hadn't been there before, not defeat something else, something quieter. A captain from maintenance approached my desk. "Sergeant Brooks, we synced the final inspection logs if you want to verify." "Send them over," I said. He nodded and walked away, not relieved, but proud. That was new. As I reviewed the files, I heard soft footsteps. Diane stood at the edge of my desk, holding a folder but not offering it. "I need to talk to you," she said. I didn't look up right away. She waited. That alone told me the dynamic had shifted. When I finally met her eyes, she leaned slightly closer. "The brigade commander wants to see me this afternoon." I nodded. "Makes sense." "I know." She swallowed. "They requested my command performance records. All of them." She wasn't asking for comfort. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was acknowledging the truth out loud for the first time. "They're going to do what they think is right," I said. "That's all." She exhaled slowly, something between frustration and acceptance. "I'm not angry at you." "You were," I said. "Yes," she admitted, "but not now." For a moment, neither of us spoke. We'd reached a point we should have reached years ago, standing in the same room, finally seeing the same truth. Before anything else could be said, Commander Miller entered the ops center. The room straightened instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. "Sergeant Brooks," he called. I stood and followed him to his office. His walls were covered in maps, mission charts, and awards. He closed the door behind us and motioned for me to sit. "I'll get to the point," he said. "Brigade and the IG team reviewed yesterday's findings. They were impressed with how quickly you stabilized the mission." "Den." I didn't say anything. Praise wasn't something I'd practiced responding to. He folded his hands. "You've been operating at a far higher level than your rank for years. Too far, frankly, without recognition." It was strange hearing someone say it out loud, the thing I'd known and ignored for too long. He continued, "The Army doesn't like unofficial structures, especially ones that hide command weaknesses. What you did stepping back, letting the system show its own failures, wasn't insubordination. It was clarity." I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. "I'm recommending you for promotion to first sergeant," he said, "effective immediately upon approval." I blinked. "Sir, that's a long time coming," he finished. "You've earned it." The words hit harder than I expected. I wasn't someone who chased rank for pride, but hearing that years of invisible labor were finally being seen that mattered. "There's one more thing," he said. "Brigade wants to restructure the logistics wing. They're creating a new senior leadership role, Operations Integration Supervisor. It will oversee cross-department functions, training, and system coherence." He paused. "I want you in that role." I didn't answer for a moment. My mind wasn't blank, it was full. Full of the late nights, the missed events, the documents nobody read, the problems I fixed quietly because I didn't know how to step back. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "But you should know. The position would give you authority to rebuild the system the right way, with real support, real staff. No more carrying everything alone." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir." He smiled, not the polite officer smile, an actual one. "You've earned more than thanks." When I stepped out of his office, the air felt different. Not lighter, just clearer. On my way back to my desk, Harper intercepted me. Sergeant, is it true they're promoting you?" I didn't confirm or deny. "Work the numbers I sent you," I said. He grinned like he'd just won something himself. "Yes, ma'am." People returned to their tasks. Screens updated. Radios buzzed. The mission kept moving. Diane was standing near her office doorway, waiting. She didn't look panicked. She didn't look angry. She looked present. For once. "You spoke to him," she said quietly. "I did." She nodded. "I heard about the new role." "Nothing's decided yet." "I know," she said, "but they didn't offer it to me." Her tone wasn't bitter. It was honest. The kind of honest she'd avoided for most of her career. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "When did you decide you were done fixing everything for me?" I thought about it. About Jake. About the years. About the exhaustion that never went away. "When I realized you never saw the cost," I said. She nodded again. Not defensive, not offended, just understanding. "I should have seen it sooner," she said. That's true, I answered. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was simple. Real. And maybe the first apology she'd ever given anyone without being forced. I know, I said. For a moment we stood in the same quiet that had filled the war room earlier. But this time it wasn't tense. It was just honest. She stepped back. I have a meeting with Brigade. I nodded. Good luck. She didn't smile, but she didn't need to. She just walked toward her office, straightened her jacket, and headed out the door with a steadiness I hadn't seen from her in days. The ops center hummed with activity, screens shifting from red to green across the board. Inside my chest, something unclenched slowly, steadily, like a muscle remembering how to relax after years of tightness. Nobody asked me to fix anything. Nobody dumped anything on my desk. Nobody waited for me to erase their mistakes. The system was working finally not because of me, but because everyone had learned what their own job actually was. And for the first time in my career, I wasn't carrying the whole weight alone. Walking out of the logistics building that afternoon, the sunlight hit differently, not brighter, not symbolic, just real, in a way I hadn't paid attention to for years. The base was buzzing again, but this time with the calm focus of a unit that had finally figured out how to function without leaning on one exhausted person to make everything perfect. Trucks moved across the lot. Forklifts hummed. Radios popped with short, competent updates instead of panicked requests. For once, the world wasn't waiting for me to fix it before it collapsed. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. No call. No text. No last-minute urgent message asking me to redo someone's entire section. I drove off the base with the kind of ease I used to imagine other people felt. People who worked normal hours, had normal boundaries, and weren't quietly responsible for keeping an entire command afloat. When I reached home, Jake was already in the driveway, basketball in hand, bouncing it against the pavement with the sloppy rhythm of a kid practicing crossovers he saw on TV. He looked up when I parked. "You're early," he said, squinting like the sun itself was confused. "I told you I'd be home early today," I said. "Yeah, but I didn't think you meant it." I smirked. "Get your shoes, you're about to lose." He grinned and sprinted inside to grab them. We played in the driveway until both of us were sweaty and laughing. He tried to talk trash, but he was 12 and terrible at it. I let him win one game, then beat him by 20 in the next, just to keep him humble. After dinner, while Jake showered, I stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, the kind that carried a hint of coming rain. I checked my phone out of habit, no notifications. It felt strange, almost unsettling in its simplicity, but good, really good. The next day, I arrived on base at a normal time without feeling like I'd abandoned something important. The operations center looked steady. People were working, talking, checking, reviewing all the things they'd been avoiding for years when they assumed I'd do it for them. Commander Miller approached me near the mission board. "How are things looking?" he asked. "Smooth," I said. "Second wave is ready for rollout. Team's handling it." He nodded. "Good. Brigade approved your promotion." I felt the words settle the way heavy things do not crashing, not surprising, just solid. "And the new role," he added. "Operations Integration Supervisor. It's yours if you want it." The weight shifted. Not pressure, possibility. "Before you answer," he said, "understand this job won't be what you were doing before. You'll have a full team. You'll train them, structure the workload properly, and make sure no one person ever becomes the system's single point of failure again. You won't be doing everything. That's the whole point." I nodded. "I know." "Then think about what's best for you and your family." Oh, that stayed with me long after he walked away. I had spent years thinking about what was best for the unit, the mission, the commanders, everyone but myself and Jake. The idea that I could choose a future without sacrificing everything felt almost foreign. Later in the morning, Diane returned from her meeting with Brigade. She stepped into the ops center with a calm, almost quiet expression. I couldn't read it, which was unusual. For years, I'd been able to track every shift in her tone, every hint of frustration, every attempt to push work off her plate and onto mine. Now, she was unreadable. She walked up to me. "Got a minute?" she asked. I followed her into the hallway. She leaned against the wall, hands clasped behind her back. "Brigade reassigned me," she said. I nodded. "Where to?" "Strategic analysis," she said. "Training pipeline oversight. No direct command." She said it without bitterness, just fact. It's a good fit, she added. Less operational pressure, more planning. I'll report under a different colonel. It wasn't a demotion. It wasn't punishment. It was a sideways shift into something she'd probably excel at if she stopped pretending she was someone she didn't know how to be. You'll do well there, I said. She exhaled slowly. I think so. But it's different. And I deserve the review. Now, there was a time when she could never have said that sentence even if you bribed her with a promotion and a beachfront condo. She looked up. I should have supported you differently. I should have been a better sister. You should have been a better commander, I said, not unkindly. She nodded again. Both. We stood there in that hallway not as commander and sergeant, not as rivals, but as two people who'd finally stopped pretending we didn't understand each other. She didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer it. But something between us loosened, like a tight rope that finally realized it didn't have to be pulled in both directions all the time. Back inside, work continued. The mission held. The unit functioned. People asked questions to the right supervisors instead of defaulting to me. And for once, I wasn't the fallback plan. I was part of the structure, not the entire structure. At lunch, I sat under a shaded picnic table on base and thought about the job offer. The new role was everything I'd wanted years ago. Authority, recognition, support, balance. But the difference now was that taking it didn't feel like survival. It felt like alignment. I called Jake during his school break. They offered me a promotion, I said. That means more money? He asked, always practical. Yeah, I said, laughing, more responsibility too, but not the kind that keeps me from coming home. He was quiet for a second. You'd still make it to my games? All of them. He didn't hesitate. Then take it. So I did. That afternoon I walked to Commander Miller's office and told him my answer. His handshake was firm. He didn't congratulate me, he respected me, which meant more. Over the next 6 weeks, the transition felt strangely natural. I hired 2 new NCOs who were sharp, detail-driven, and hungry to prove themselves. I built training modules that actually made sense. I established clear responsibilities so nobody could play the "I thought someone else had it" game. Departments improved, communication got cleaner. And the system started looking like something that didn't need a miracle every week to stay alive. Diane settled into her new position too. She wasn't hovering over my workspace anymore. She wasn't snapping orders. We still talked briefly, simply but without the old tension. She'd stopped being the black hole in the room that consumed everyone's effort and confidence. On Jake's next game night, I stood in the bleachers, coffee in one hand, cheering like any parent who'd finally learned that showing up is a bigger victory than any rank. That night, when we got home, he tossed his glove on the couch and said, "You seem happier." "I am," I said. "Things are clearer now." "Work stuff?" he asked. "Life stuff," I answered. He nodded like he understood more than a 12-year-old should, then went off to shower. I sat at the kitchen table, thinking about the months behind me, the quiet revenge of stepping back, the collapse of an old system, the rebuilding of something better, the shift in my relationship with my sister, the new role that fit instead of suffocating, and the life I was finally learning how to live for myself, not for the expectations of others. There was no dramatic ending, no explosion, no final confrontation, just a system that finally worked, a family learning to heal, a career built on my terms, and the steady, simple truth that my worth had always been there. It just took stepping back for everyone to finally see it.